a few minutes, which says, following further evaluation this morning, the Queen's doctors are concerned for Her Majesty's health and have recommended...
The silence of the Scottish Highlands has always been the ultimate sanctuary for the British royal family, a place where the weight of the crown is briefly set aside in favor of the rolling mist and the ancient granite walls of Balmoral. Imagine a fortress not of stone and iron, but of absolute, unshakable trust, a private wing where the most famous people on the planet can finally stop being icons and simply be parents, spouses, and siblings. For generations, the private quarters of Balmoral were whispered to be the safest place in the royal world, a sanctuary where no lens could penetrate and no outsider could ever tread. But that illusion of total safety, a foundation upon which the monarchy's personal peace was built, was shattered in a single, terrifying heartbeat. It wasn't a loud intrusion or a public scandal that broke the peace. Instead, it was a quiet, cold discovery that turned a place of rest into a theater of paranoia. A sharp eye caught a glint of something that should never have existed in a place of such profound intimacy, a hidden camera, meticulously placed inside a protected royal corridor, silently watching the heart of the institution. In that staggering second, the monarchy ceased to worry about mere public embarrassment or tabloid gossip. It found itself staring down the barrel of a full-blown crisis of trust, a betrayal that suggested the enemy was no longer at the gates, but already inside the house. Before we delve into the harrowing details of this discovery and what it truly signifies for the future of the royal family, ensure you are subscribed to our channel so you never miss a single update on this developing story. Catherine, the Princess of Wales, had entered that specific corridor following a long and perhaps emotionally taxing family meeting, her footsteps echoing softly against the historic floorboards. She was seeking the old, familiar comfort of royal silence, that unique atmosphere of Balmoral where the frantic pace of London life feels like a distant memory. The private wing of the estate, a strictly sequestered area of the Scottish royal residence, serves as the inner sanctum where senior royals reside away from the prying eyes of the press and the heavy demands of public duty. This area had always carried one sacred, unspoken promise. What happened within these specific walls stayed inside these walls, protected by centuries of tradition and layers of elite security. This mattered profoundly because this was not a public palace room meant for state receptions. It was not a press-facing chamber designed for choreographed appearances, nor was it a place built for the performance of royalty. It was the site where tired voices finally softened, where guarded individuals lowered their psychological defenses, and where the family could finally stop acting like a rigid institution and simply breathe as human beings. Then, the world tilted on its axis. Catherine saw it, a tiny obsidian lens tucked with chilling precision near a carved wall fixture, angled with far too much technical purpose to be dismissed as a maintenance error or a stray piece of hardware. She stopped so suddenly that the very air around her seemed to tighten and turn cold, the breath catching in her throat. Her shock did not manifest in a loud cry or a dramatic gesture. Instead, it moved through her in a wave of profound silence first, a cold realization that quickly hardened into a focused, controlled fear. Prince William, always attuned to his wife's presence, noticed the shift before a single word had been exchanged. He watched her face drain of color and change in an instant, stepping closer to her with an instinctive, protective urgency. From her absolute stillness, the future king understood immediately that something sacred had been crossed, a boundary that should have been inviolable. Catherine pointed once, her finger steady, but her eyes wide with the gravity of the find. That was all it took. William followed her gaze to the hidden device, and his expression turned cold in a way that made the nearest aide lower his eyes in immediate instinctive trepidation. A senior household official was summoned forward, one of the few individuals trusted to manage the most private royal spaces and protect restricted access to the family's inner life. His hands visibly trembled as he moved to remove the device from its hiding place, the gravity of the situation weighing heavily on everyone present. This was a catastrophic failure because a hidden camera in that particular corridor did not simply threaten the privacy of a few individuals. It threatened the sanctity of private conversations, the security of family movements, and those quiet, vulnerable moments that no official royal statement could ever hope to repair or reclaim. The device finally came free, looking deceptively small enough to be hidden in plain sight, yet powerful enough to dismantle decades of hard-won trust. Catherine looked at the small piece of technology without speaking, her mind likely racing through the implications of who might have been watching. William kept his body angled near hers, a posture of protective defiance, while the aide placed the camera into a sterile, sealed pouch, waiting for orders that no one in the room seemed emotionally ready to give. No one needed to vocalize the thought that was screaming in all of their minds. If that camera had been active, then someone, somewhere, may have been listening and watching long before anyone knew they were under surveillance. King Charles was informed of the discovery within minutes, the news traveling like a lightning strike through the estate. The king did not react with the expected confusion or an outburst of temper. Instead, he grew incredibly still. That heavy, regal stillness frightened those in the room more than a display of anger would have, because it suggested a deep well of memory, a warning from the past, and perhaps a secret already simmering beneath the surface of the monarchy. As Catherine stood in that guarded corridor, surrounded by the echoes of history, the burning question was no longer merely about who had found the camera. It was about the identity of the person who had been watching. A crisis inside the monarchy is never just about a physical object. It is about the people standing around it, the faces that shift under the pressure of suspicion, the words that are deliberately not spoken, and the loyalties that are suddenly placed under an agonizing microscope. Catherine had been the one to find the device, but William, Charles, Camilla, and the circle of trusted aides around them all understood a darker reality. Privacy had been fundamentally broken, and whoever had placed that camera was close enough to the inner workings of the palace to know exactly where to look and where the security blind spots were located. Catherine became the eye of this burgeoning storm because her intuition had caught what every professional guard and electronic sweep had somehow missed. This was a critical distinction because the camera was not placed in a public gallery or a hallway frequented by tourists. It sat deep within the private wing, the family-only zone where senior royals are meant to speak with absolute freedom, devoid of the need for scripts or masks. Catherine knew with a haunting certainty that if such a device could appear in the heart of Balmoral, then no place within the ancient royal walls could ever be considered fully safe again. William stepped into the center of the crisis beside her, operating not just as a husband concerned for his wife's well-being, but as the future king responsible for the integrity of the institution. The prince stared at the sealed pouch on the table, then looked at Catherine, his silence becoming sharper and more intimidating than any verbal outburst could be. He wanted immediate answers, and he wanted names. But he also possessed the tactical awareness to know that raw anger could make the room careless. In the world of the palace, careless words are weapons that can be used against you. Catherine, despite the violation she felt, refused to break under the pressure. Her hands tightened around the edge of a mahogany chair until her knuckles were white, yet her voice remained remarkably calm as she asked a single, devastating question. Who was the last person to enter that corridor? That display of control made the moment feel even heavier, a testament to her strength. She felt deeply violated, yet she would not give the perpetrator the satisfaction of seeing fear dictate her actions. William noticed the tension in her hands, and his jaw hardened with a grim finality before he issued a single quiet order that brooked no argument: clear the room. When King Charles entered the space later, the atmospheric pressure shifted once again. The monarch studied the technological intruder without touching it, and his expression did not betray surprise. Instead, it showed a profound sense of dread. This mattered because dread is a precursor to memory, and in that chilling instant, Catherine understood that this security breach might have touched upon warnings that had been whispered behind closed doors for years. Charles requested the internal access list, the digital and physical record showing exactly who had the high-level permission required to enter such restricted spaces, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop further. Queen Camilla reacted the moment that list was mentioned, her demeanor shifting instantly. The queen consort straightened her posture, becoming defensive before a single accusation had even been leveled against her or her staff. Her voice carried a sharp, defensive edge as she questioned why her particular household was being pulled into the investigation so early. Charles looked at her only once, a long, unreadable gaze before looking away toward the window. William said absolutely nothing, but the heavy silence between him and Camilla became its own form of accusation, a bridge burning in real time. The trusted aides in the room lowered their eyes, sensing a tectonic divide forming within the family. Then, the private security log arrived. It revealed a devastating truth. Only a very small, elite group had been granted access to that corridor in the days leading up to Catherine's discovery. It wasn't dozens of people. It wasn't a group of anonymous contractors. It was a tiny circle. This truth changed the nature of the crisis entirely, because the access list did not create the danger by itself. The real danger had taken root weeks earlier during a moment everyone had tried to bury. Every royal crisis has a hidden origin story, a beginning obscured by the fog of ceremony and tradition. This particular one began not with the physical placement of wires and lenses, but with a dinner at Balmoral 3 weeks prior that had ended in a wall of cold, uncomfortable silence. Catherine remembered the evening with crystalline clarity. William remembered the tension even more sharply. Even Charles, seated at the head of the table that night, had witnessed enough friction in one room to know that something fundamental within the family's dynamic had shifted forever. Catherine had arrived at that dinner expecting a difficult conversation regarding logistics, not a harbinger of a security disaster. The family had gathered specifically to discuss the future of household access and the tightening of security limits, essentially, the protocol for who could enter private royal spaces and under whose specific authority. This was a vital discussion because Balmoral is no ordinary house. It is a sprawling estate where the lines between staff and family are often blurred by history. If access within the private wing became too relaxed, then the private life of the family could be exposed from the inside out. Catherine had raised the first concern with her trademark care, asking why certain movements within the private wing were appearing on internal schedules days in advance, before the senior family members had even finalized their plans. William had looked toward her, then toward the others, recognizing the inherent danger. If movements were being logged and broadcast too early, an opportunistic actor would know exactly who would be in a specific corridor, who would be alone, and exactly when the most vulnerable parts of the estate would be open for exploitation. Camilla had taken the question as if it were a personal strike against her management. The queen consort's face had tightened, and she had pushed back with visible irritation, suggesting that Catherine's concern sounded less like prudent caution and more like an unwarranted air of suspicion directed at the staff. Catherine did not escalate the situation or raise her voice. She simply repeated that privacy was not a luxury for this family, but a vital line of protection. That calm, rational answer only served to sharpen the mood because Camilla heard an accusation even in the face of a legitimate warning. William had defended his wife with a sense of dangerous restraint, not attacking Camilla directly, but making it undeniably clear that Catherine had every right to question who was tracking their private movements. Charles had listened from the head of the table, seeing the split in his family before anyone had even named it. Then came the trigger for the current disaster, a detail no one would later want to admit was the catalyst. Following the dispute at the Balmoral dinner over access logs, someone, it remained unclear who at the time, ordered an unofficial security review. This was a private check conducted outside the normal, rigorous chain of command and approval. That single rogue order effectively opened the door for the hidden camera to be placed. A junior aide later admitted in a recorded internal statement that an outside technician had been granted entry to the private wing under the guise of performing a routine check on the alarm sensors. Catherine remembered that dinner the very second the camera was found. William remembered the frost that had settled over the table after her question. Charles remembered Camilla's flash of anger and the strange, suspicious speed with which that so-called security review had followed the argument. When Catherine connected the dots between that night and the camera in the corridor, the discovery stopped being a simple security breach and became something deeply personal. Once the memories of that dinner resurfaced, there was only one path forward, a confrontation that no member of the family could avoid. The palace can survive many things. It can survive cruel rumors, it can survive scandalous headlines, and it can survive public scrutiny, but it cannot easily survive an internal family confrontation where every face carries a different, conflicting version of the truth. Catherine entered the designated private meeting room first, her presence quiet but completely unshaken. William followed closely behind, radiating a sense of restrained fury. Charles waited near his desk, looking every bit the man burdened by the weight of the crown and the knowledge he now possessed. When Camilla arrived, the very air in the room changed, thickening with tension before a single word was uttered. Charles had summoned them without any junior staff or advisors present, a rare move that signaled just how precarious the situation had become. The private sitting room, a space usually reserved for family conversations far removed from the machinery of the state, now felt like a courtroom. The hidden camera sat on the desk, encased in its sealed evidence pouch, serving as a physical manifestation of the suspicion that now divided them. No one could dismiss the crisis as mere paranoia. The proof was sitting right there in front of them. Catherine looked at Camilla first, her voice low but carrying the weight of an ultimatum. She stated that the private wing was intended to protect the dignity of the family, not to provide a platform for exposing it. The queen consort did not offer an immediate rebuttal. She held Catherine's gaze for a long moment before looking toward the king, perhaps hoping for a softening of the situation. But Charles remained motionless, watching both women with the weary eyes of a man who knew the line had been crossed long ago. William stepped in before the silence could swallow the room, his voice cutting through the tension. He demanded to know who had specifically approved the outside technician, a question that landed with the finality of a gavel. Camilla insisted she had no knowledge of any such device, her voice hardening in her own defense as she argued that her entire household could not be branded as guilty based on a single access entry. Catherine did not flinch, and William did not blink. Charles, remarkably, refused to step in and protect anyone with hollow words or platitudes. William then opened the access log and read a single line aloud, revealing that the technician had entered the private wing using a clearance code tied directly to a senior household channel. This was the moment the ambiguity vanished. An access log is supposed to provide clarity. Instead, it had made everything infinitely worse. The code was not random, and the technician had not made a mistake. Someone had opened the door. Camilla's expression shifted as the weight of the evidence became undeniable. She argued that the channel in question could have been accessed by several different people, but the defensive sharpness in her tone suggested she knew how deeply the blow had landed. Charles set his pen down with a slow, deliberate motion, stating that he would not defend anyone, not Camilla, not her staff, not even his own office, until the entire chain of approval was laid bare. That sentence effectively stripped the room of any remaining comfort. Catherine stood up first, her exit made more powerful by her refusal to shout. William stayed behind for a moment, his anger having cooled into a focused, icy resolve, and asked his father what he intended to do about the betrayal. The king looked at the camera, then at his son, and the silence finally shifted into the cold exercise of royal authority. Power within the monarchy rarely announces itself with a roar. More often, it arrives in the form of a quiet order or a closed file. Charles had spent his entire life preparing to guard the institution from external scandal. But now the most dangerous threat had manifested from within the very walls he was sworn to protect. He could no longer treat the hidden camera as a technical error. It was a fundamental betrayal of the family bond. He took control of the situation before it could dissolve into another round of circular arguments. The king ordered an immediate, total lockdown of all access records for the Balmoral private wing. Every entry, every approval, every badge scan, and every recorded movement of staff was to be frozen and subjected to a forensic review. This was a critical step because in moments of panic, records have a habit of vanishing. Charles made it clear that no title, no long-standing friendship, and no household loyalty would serve as a shield during this inquiry. He was separating his personal pain from his royal duty. He knew that this order would likely embarrass people very close to him and cut across decades of loyalty. but he also knew that doing nothing would be a far greater sin. To leave the matter unresolved would be to wound Catherine even more deeply and leave William with the impression that the palace valued its own comfort over the truth. Camilla sat alone after the meeting, visibly shaken by the implications of the king's order. She understood that if the investigation scrutinized her staff, the shadow of suspicion would inevitably reach her own door. She had denied knowing about the device, and she wanted that denial to stand. But the lockdown made her protests feel increasingly fragile. The investigation soon yielded its first chilling discovery. The palace security team found that the hidden camera had never been integrated into the main official protection system. This was a crucial detail, because official security devices are logged, monitored, and subject to strict oversight. This camera had been placed outside of those normal channels, quietly, deliberately, and with just enough high-level access to bypass immediate detection. Charles read the next briefing note twice, the information sinking in with a heavy thud. A private technician's badge had been activated for exactly 11 minutes. 11 minutes to enter, 11 minutes to install the device, and 11 minutes to leave behind a breach that had turned the promise of royal privacy into a gaping wound. The king's authority seemed to weigh heavily on him as he signed the papers for several immediate staff suspensions. By the next morning, the atmosphere at Balmoral had changed completely. It no longer felt like a refuge. It felt like a house holding its breath in anticipation of a collapse. Doors that had once swung open with ease were now monitored with eagle-eyed precision. Corridors that were once crossed without a second thought became guarded routes. Catherine moved through this new, stifling silence with a quiet resolve, but the damage was already done. The camera was gone, but the ghost of it remained. The trust that allowed the family to live as human beings behind the palace walls had been broken. William spent the morning in a state of cold focus, refusing any attempts at comfort. His only concern was whether his wife and children had ever been at direct risk while the camera was active. The security teams began a retrospective review of all private visits, checking every permission and every entry code used over the preceding months. This mattered because if the camera had been operational for a long period, then every private conversation and every moment of peace had been compromised. Catherine felt a sense of profound sadness. She could handle the dangers of public life, but this was a violation of the one place where she was supposed to be able to stop defending herself. She thought of the whispered conversations with William, the moments of parenting away from the world's gaze, and the realization that these might have been recorded as evidence for an unknown entity was almost unforgivable. During the intense questioning that followed, one aide finally broke. He admitted in a recorded interview that the technician's visit had been presented to him as urgent but discreet. Those two words were the key to the entire mystery. Urgent implied high-level pressure, while discreet served as a code for secrecy. Together, they suggested a calculated effort to bypass the people who should have been informed. William recognized the tactical choice of words immediately. The investigation then revealed the most damning detail of all. The camera had not been pointed at a doorway or a general area. Its lens was angled specifically at a corridor used for private family discussions, the exact spot where people naturally lowered their voices before entering a room. Catherine absorbed this detail in silence, her composure a mask for the deep hurt underneath. William watched her, his anger softening into a protective concern for his wife's mental peace. He could fight a system, but he couldn't easily undo the feeling of being watched in one's own home. Catherine eventually turned to William and asked for a conversation with no aides, no courtiers, and no palace interference. She told him that she felt watched in the very place she had always tried to feel safe. This was the core of the crisis. Balmoral was supposed to be a sanctuary for their children, a place where they could exist without the crushing weight of the crown. William responded with a vow that his children would not step foot in that wing again until every single answer was found. It was a father's promise, carved in stone. Catherine decided then that she would not allow this to be buried under polite palace language. There would be no unfortunate misunderstanding or clerical error. The violation was real, and the family's response had to be equally real. William agreed to support a full internal reckoning, an exhaustive review where rank and title offered no protection from scrutiny. They took this resolve back to King Charles, who listened as the last of his old habits of palace protection began to fade. He had to choose between the comfortable silence of the past and the painful accountability of the future. By the time their decision was finalized, the news was already beginning to leak to the world outside the granite walls. When the story finally broke, it hit the British public with the force of a national shock. This wasn't just another tabloid rumor, it was an invasive, intimate violation of the future Queen's privacy. The image of Catherine standing in a corridor and realizing she was being watched became a powerful symbol of a security failure. The palace issued a controlled statement, a rare admission of a serious security breach within the restricted areas of Balmoral. This was the monarchy admitting that something had gone fundamentally wrong. Supporters described Catherine as dignified but deeply hurt, a sentiment that resonated with a public that saw her not as a royal icon, but as a woman whose home had been violated. King Charles felt the weight of public disappointment. The Crown's promise has always been one of order and protection, and now that promise was visibly cracked. A major London newspaper ran a headline that captured the mood of the entire country. Who watched the Windsors? It was a question that no one at the palace could yet answer with certainty. Crowds gathered in silence outside Buckingham Palace, not to protest, but to witness the unfolding of a crisis that felt uniquely modern and uniquely painful. Broadcasters framed the breach as a defining test of Charles's reign. Could he protect his family as effectively as he protected the institution? In the quiet aftermath of the public storm, the king delivered his final verdict. He announced that the entire access structure of Balmoral's private wing would be dismantled and rebuilt from the ground up. The old way of doing things, the favors, the informal approvals, the discreet requests, was over. The private wing had to be a sanctuary again, even if it took years to rebuild the trust that had been lost. Catherine received the news with a sense of quiet relief. She didn't want a victory. She just wanted to feel safe in her own home. Charles had chosen action over comfort, and in doing so, he had acknowledged the depth of the wound. William remained vigilant, knowing that the safety of his family was now his primary mission. A new, much stricter security chain was implemented, ensuring that every request for access would be subjected to rigorous, official checks. Camilla's household faced a period of intense scrutiny, a move that wounded her pride, but was necessary to clear the air. The king's decision made it clear, the palace would no longer protect feelings at the expense of the truth. The hidden camera at Balmoral would be remembered not as a minor lapse, but as the day accountability finally triumphed over the status quo. Catherine's discovery had changed the royal family forever, forcing them to remember that trust is not a given. It is a promise that must be defended every single day. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.